Winter storms in the Colorado Rockies are nothing to mess with. If you're caught outside at the wrong time, you could freeze to death before anyone finds you. I used to love winter, but after what happened 15 years ago, I don't go near the mountains when the snow starts falling, because I know that sometimes, when the blizzard comes, you're not alone. I was 8 years old when my family took me and my brother, Josh, up to our winter cabin in the mountains. It had been in our family for decades, an old, creaky place with wood-paneled walls and a fireplace that smelled like burnt pine. The snow had been coming down hard all day, so naturally, my brother and I couldn't wait to go outside. We bundled up in layer after layer, practically waddling through the front door as our parents called after us. "Stay close to the house." We didn't listen. That was our first mistake. Josh and I ran out into the clearing beside the cabin, where the woods stretched in all directions. The snow was already waist-deep, and the wind howled through the trees, shaking branches like skeletal fingers. We built snow forts, crafting thick walls of packed ice, and started throwing snowballs at each other. Then, we decided to make it a game. The snowball challenge. We had one rule. One of us had to steal the jewel, a giant packed snowball, from the other's fort and return to our base. Josh, being older and faster, took off down the road leading away from the cabin. He was supposed to set up his base and blow a whistle to signal the start of the game. But after 10 minutes, the whistle never came. At first, I thought maybe I just missed it. I debated whether to take the road or cut through the woods to find his fort. The road felt safer, but in hindsight, I wish I had taken the woods, because maybe then I wouldn't have seen her. I trudged through the deep snow, following Josh's footprints, my breath fogging up in the freezing air. The wind screamed around me, shaking the trees, making everything feel wrong. Then, as I reached the neighbor's property, I heard someone call my name, a woman's voice. I turned. There, standing in the doorway of the neighbor's cabin, was an old woman, wrapped in a long brown coat. Her face was pale, her eyes almost sunken, and she smiled, too wide. "Are you looking for your brother?" she called. I nodded, shivering. "Yeah." She tilted her head. "He was just here." My stomach twisted. Josh had never mentioned stopping at the neighbor's house. The wind picked up, and I instinctively stepped closer, until I saw something in the upstairs window. A face, watching me. At first, I thought it was Josh, but then I noticed. The face was covered, half hidden under a black beanie, and the mouth was pressed tightly beneath the window pane. I took another step back. That's when I saw the footprints leading inside, and my heart stopped. The woman smiled wider and beckoned me forward. "Come inside," she said. "Get out of the cold." I hesitated. Then, from inside the house, I heard heavy footsteps coming down the stairs. I didn't think. I just ran. The woman's smile vanished as she lunged forward, screaming something I didn't understand. I sprinted back through the snow, slipping, gasping, my lungs burning. Then, from behind me, a door slammed open. Someone else was coming out. I saw my dad standing outside our cabin, his face twisting in confusion as he heard the shouting. "Dad!" I screamed, throwing myself into the driveway. He turned, just as Josh burst out of the woods behind me. His face was red, covered in frost, his breath coming in sharp gasps. "They tried to get me," he choked out. My dad didn't hesitate. He grabbed a hunting rifle from the cabin and stormed down toward the neighbor's house. Josh and I huddled inside as my mom peppered us with questions. Minutes stretched into eternity before our dad finally returned, his face pale. "No one answered the door," he muttered. So he went to the other neighbor's house, the one farther down the road. When they called the owners of the cabin, they told him something that still haunts me to this day. The owners had been out of town for over a week. Nobody was supposed to be staying in the house. The police were called. They searched the place, found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, no trace of the woman, or the figure in the window. But I know what I saw, and to this day, whenever I see a blizzard rolling in, I still hear it. The sound of knocking on the window, slow, rhythmic, like someone waiting to be let inside. I've spent every winter hunting in the forests of northern Minnesota since I was a kid. My father and grandfather taught me everything. How to track prints in the snow, how to move silently in the woods, and, most importantly, how to respect the land. But last year, I learned something they never taught me. Because last winter, I found a cabin that shouldn't exist, and when I went back the next day, it was gone. It was early December, just after the season's first heavy snowfall. I had taken my truck up to Dead Elk Ridge, a hunting ground a few hours from my cabin. The place was remote. Miles of untouched wilderness, thick pine forests stretching in all directions. I planned to camp overnight, track deer at dawn, then head back before the next storm rolled in. I never made it to morning. By the time I reached the ridge, the sun was already dipping below the trees. I set up camp near a frozen stream, pitched my tent, and started a fire. The woods were eerily quiet. Not unusual in winter, but something about the stillness made my skin crawl. Then, just past the tree line, I saw the light, a warm, flickering glow, barely visible through the falling snow. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but then I saw it. A cabin, nestled in the trees. It hadn't been there before. I had hunted these woods for years. I knew every clearing, every landmark. I had never seen a cabin here, and yet, there it was, old, wooden, and completely out of place. A single window glowed faintly, like candlelight flickering behind the glass. The hairs on my arms stood on end. Something felt wrong. I should have ignored it. I should have stayed by my fire. Instead, I grabbed my rifle and stepped toward the cabin. That was my first mistake. The closer I got, the more unnatural it looked. The wood was too aged, warped and cracked like it had been abandoned for decades. But the window was clean. The door, slightly ajar, creaked as the wind blew. A fresh set of footprints led inside. I swallowed hard. Someone was in there. I knocked on the frame. Hello? No answer. Just the wind howling through the trees. I pushed the door open. The fireplace was lit, but the cabin was empty. The place was small, just one room with a dusty wooden table, a rusted iron stove, and an old rocking chair. The fire crackled softly, filling the air with the scent of burning cedar. Someone had been here recently, and yet, there were no other signs of life. No food, no gear, just one thing on the table. A photo album. I don't know why, but I opened it. The first picture made my stomach drop. It was a photo of me. I snapped the book shut, my breath coming fast. My hands trembled as I stepped back, my boots scuffing against the wooden floor. The fire sputtered. The rocking chair creaked. And then, I heard the footsteps. Upstairs. I hadn't noticed the attic hatch before. It sat in the ceiling, slightly ajar, a dark gap gaping open above me. The footsteps shifted. Slow, deliberate, coming down the ladder. I ran. I didn't think. I just bolted out of the cabin, my rifle slamming against my back. Snow whipped into my face as I sprinted for my camp, my lungs burning from the cold. Behind me, I heard the creaking of the cabin door swinging open, but I didn't look back. I barely slept that night. I sat by the fire, my rifle across my lap, my ears straining against the howling wind. But nothing came. No footsteps, no movement, just the endless, empty woods. By morning, I convinced myself that I had imagined it, that I was just tired, cold, seeing things. So I packed up my gear and hiked back to the truck. But when I reached the clearing where I had seen the cabin, it was gone. No footprints, no ashes from the fire, just untouched snow, like it had never been there at all. I don't go back to Dead Elk Ridge anymore. I don't know who or what was in that attic. But sometimes, when I'm driving alone in the snow, I swear I see a flickering light deep in the trees. A single, glowing window, waiting for me to come inside. Again. I grew up hearing stories about the frozen ones, whispers passed down by the older folks in my hometown in northern Alaska. They said that if you got lost in the tundra during a whiteout, they would find you. They weren't ghosts. They weren't human. And if you saw one, you'd never make it home. I never believed those stories. Until last winter. It was late December, and the cold was unlike anything I'd ever felt before. I was part of a search and rescue team, and we had been called out to find a missing hiker. His name was Daniel Rourke, a wildlife photographer who had come up to Alaska to capture images of the winter wilderness. He had sent out an emergency GPS ping 3 nights ago, but when authorities tried to reach him, there was nothing but static. Temperatures had dropped below -20 degrees, and a storm was rolling in. If we didn't find him soon, we'd be searching for a body instead of a person. Our team of 4, me, Isaac, Ben, and Claire, set out on snowmobiles just before sunset. Daniel's last known location was 6 miles into the backcountry, a place where few people dared to go in winter. There were no roads, no cabins, just a vast, empty landscape of snow, ice, and silence. We rode in single file, our headlights cutting through the growing darkness. The radio crackled in my ear as Claire, our lead navigator, called out updates. "We're a mile out. If he's alive, we should be picking up movement soon." No one responded, because we all knew something felt off. When we reached the GPS coordinates, Daniel's tent was still there, but it was half buried in the snow, its fabric torn and flapping in the wind. No sign of him, no tracks, just a single hole in the ice, perfectly round, as if someone had drilled through it. Isaac and I exchanged uneasy glances. He was ice fishing? I asked. Ben shook his head. No, that hole's too clean. It wasn't made with an auger. Claire was already pulling the tin open, and that's when we saw the camera, still recording. Isaac picked it up, brushing snow off the lens. The battery light blinked red, but the screen still glowed faintly. Claire pressed play. The footage was grainy, but we could make out Daniel, sitting by the ice hole. His face was pale, lips cracked, eyes darting around like he had been hearing something. Then, in the background, the wind shifted. A whisper crept through the speakers. Not the wind, a voice. Daniel snapped his head up, eyes wide. He dropped his fishing rod, scrambling to his feet. The camera shook as he grabbed it, breathing hard. Then, the whisper came again, clearer this time. "Come closer." Daniel spun around, the camera light illuminating something behind him. Something tall, pale, standing at the edge of the ice hole. We couldn't see its face, but we saw its breath. Long, slow exhales, fogging up in the cold air. The footage cut to static. Claire cursed, tapping the camera, but the battery died. We all stood there, breathless. Ben was the first to break the silence. "We need to leave. Now." Isaac shook his head. "No, we keep searching." "Are you crazy?" Ben snapped. "He's gone. You saw the footage." I turned my flashlight back toward the ice hole, and my blood went cold, because there was something inside it. At first, I thought it was just ice, a trick of the light. But then, it moved. Something pale shifted beneath the frozen water, just below the surface. I took a step back. Isaac did too. Claire whispered, "What the hell is that?" Then, from the ice hole, a hand slammed against the surface. We all jumped back, weapons raised. The hand was wrong, too long, fingers unnaturally thin, the skin frostbitten and cracked. It didn't break through. It just pressed there, as if feeling for something. Then another hand appeared. Then another. Then another. And then, a face. It wasn't Daniel. It wasn't even human. The eyes were black, hollow pits. The mouth was too wide, lips frozen open in an expression that was almost a smile. It watched us. And then, in a voice that wasn't quite right, it spoke. "You're too late." That was it. We ran. Claire jumped on her snowmobile first, screaming at us to move. I didn't even realize I had been holding my breath until I was racing across the tundra, my heart hammering in my chest. Ben shouted into the radio, but the signal was nothing but static. I looked back only once, and I regret it, because in the distance, they were following us. Not running, not chasing, just gliding over the ice, their pale forms flickering in and out of the storm like shadows moving behind a curtain. The lights of our snowmobiles barely touched them, and I swear I heard them laughing. We didn't stop until we reached the ranger station. Claire radioed for backup. Isaac locked the doors, and we waited. But the storm kept howling outside, and as the night stretched on, I could have sworn, through the frost-covered windows, I saw something standing just beyond the tree leaf. Not moving, not breathing, just watching. Daniel Rourke was never found. No footprints, no body, just his tint and camera. The police ruled it as exposure, saying he must have wandered off and frozen in the storm. But we know the truth. We know what we saw, and we know that somewhere, beneath the ice, they're still waiting.